Good evening, folks. Welcome back. It's our Sunday evening special edition of Tropical Tracks. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good news tonight. And I'm just going to get right to it. We're waiting on the advisory from the National Hurricane Center, which should be in any minute. It's 10:40, so they've got about another 20 minutes to get it out the door. I'm sure they're very busy thinking all the considerations now that are going in. Our watch is going to need to be extended up the Florida coast. They've been running storm surge models now since the first advisories were issued, and eventually those are going to come into play, and we'll be talking about that as well. But let's get right into it first off and show you what's going on with the storm, and then we'll kind of break down what's been happening as we've been going through the evening here. What you can see over here is the satellite. It's the big blow-up of thunderstorms that's been taking place this evening, and you can see the center is located right about there. Now, there's a little red line coming out here. So what I do is I plot the previous position and then plot where the forecast track at that time is supposed to be. So then when the new advisory comes in, that little line disappears, and then our center point there moves on over. But it looks like, at least based on this picture here, and let me zoom in here a little bit. That'll make it a little bit easier to when I say if it looks like. So the center should be at this time now for the 11 o'clock advisory somewhere right around there, but it looks like the center is over there. It may be a little bit faster. That may or may not play a role in the big scheme of things here. There was some sense that if it is a little bit faster, it gets to that dip in a jet stream, that trough that we've been talking about a little bit sooner, but that motion may slow down a little bit, but it has been not moving too slow at all. It's been moving right along there. And with this big burst of thunderstorms here, this was kind of the onset, I think, of the rapid intensification phase. And a lot of folks talk about rapid intensification. It has a specific definition. It is an increase of 35 miles an hour in wind speed in the storm within 24 hours. So I think the Hurricane Center is calling for about a 40 mile an hour wind increase within 24 hours. So that's a lot of intensity increase. And the storm's been kind of hovering here at this certain pressure level. Let me show you that, because it was kind of interesting and like, oh, here we go, when this popped up this evening. So this is a view of what the hurricane hunters were doing this evening. They're tracked through there, and they came in and made their first pass here and found the pressure on their first drop at 992 millibars. Now, it's been hovering between about 1,002 and 1,004 to 1,006, so the low 1,000s. What does all this mean? Who cares about that? Well, the wind and the pressure have a relationship, and the lower the pressure goes, the higher the wind goes. And a lot of times on a system that's developing, you will get the indication that it's going to start strengthening when the pressure starts going down. And then they kind of reach this relationship where they're almost in tandem. The winds come up a little bit more and the pressure goes down a little bit more. But initially, usually, on a tropical cyclone, when the pressure goes down, then the wind starts responding. And once we get the center there and the eye and stuff, then all these other forces start taking hold, which balances the wind pressure relationship, cyclostrophic gradient theory and stuff like that. Don't worry, we're not going to go into that tonight because that would be a lot. So let's kind of go through what we've been looking at through the day-to-day here. And some of the things that were already included here, and these are going to come up. These are not going to change with the 11 o'clock advisory. This is the rainfall estimates from the Weather Prediction Center, and what you can see there is a good swath of Florida is at least going to be in the 2 to 4 with possibly 6 inches of rain, and it could come down pretty quickly as well, like all at once. You can see from that graphic there that there's kind of a rain swath there in the Gulf. That would be based on the Hurricane Center's previous advisory, where the center tracks, but if the center is closer to the coast, then the rainfall amounts are going to be higher. Also here now showing up, this is the 3-day outlook. This is Tuesday through Wednesday morning, and this is from the Storm Prediction Center, and you see down there in Florida, we're in a marginal risk for tornadoes, severe thunderstorms and tornadoes, with Ian coming very close to the eastern Gulf of Mexico and Florida there. It's going to set up a favorable wind profile, so we might be dealing with the threat of tornadoes as well. So, and that's all of South Florida. That includes the west coast to the east coast, just about everybody. So we're going to be watching that very carefully. Now, what kind of made me go, oh, that's not what we want to see, is what's happened in what we call the TVC, and it's a consensus model. And these models do very well, and it's really not technically a model because it's the blend of many models together. And when these models are blended together, they seem to do better than the single models alone. They also kind of compensate for wild extremes of the left or the right. Well, you can see there, and it's the darkest one here, the darkest line. It is now shifted over closer to the west coast of Florida. So this is every 6 hours since yesterday morning. And yesterday morning, there was the consensus that was out there, and it has gradually gotten closer and closer and closer. And that's not a good thing, because one of the things we're seeing is that a storm here in this part of the Gulf of Mexico is very likely going to be much stronger than a storm up here, because by the time it gets up there, it's expected to encounter some very strong wind shear, some dry air. There's indications of even a front that's up in North Florida there in the Panhandle area by the time that Ian gets closer there. So this trend over here towards the west coast of Florida, that's certainly not something we want to see here at all. So certainly on the west coast, this is not good news. Now, we're going to be watching these plots here. These are every 6 hour positions, and as long as they don't keep shifting a little more to the right here, closer to Grand Cayman there, I think this track here is going to hold. But I think we also have every expectation that the Hurricane Center's forecast track at 11 is also going to shift a little more to the east there. So that's something we're going to be watching here. We're going to be talking about what does it mean for you folks in Clearwater, what does it mean for you folks in the Tampa Bay area, Sarasota, all the way up the coast. Now here's the specific evening models. This is the European, and I've been looking at the European like every 6 hours, and it is kind of, and I used this word today when I was talking to some friends, it's dug in. It has hardly varied at all. Once it's settled down there over this west coast approach track here, it has not varied much. Now, what makes this a very, very tricky forecast is that these lines here well, first off, here's the west coast of Florida, right? So it's kind of going from south-southeast to north-northwest, and some of it's just going basically south to north. And these lines are coming in at an angle like that. So potentially, it doesn't take much to be off of one of these lines to move way up the coast there and be quite a bigger difference with what's going on. So that's certainly something that is going to be in play here. It's way too early to talk about landfall locations and things like that. It is not way too early to be thinking that we may have a serious hurricane event on the west coast of Florida. Could be as far south as Fort Myers, could be in the Sarasota area, could be up through Manatee County and including Pinellas and Hillsborough County, and it could be north of that, Pasco, Hernando, and on up through Citrus and Crystal River, and on up into Levy County and Cedar Key. So pretty much right now, all of the west coast of Florida is under the gun for this. And because we're just not good enough with the computer models yet to really kind of narrow down like where it's going to go 2 or 3 days out, we all need to be thinking of kind of more aggressive preparations on the west coast of Florida. Now you can see there are no more swings into South Florida here. If it does, and a lot of folks are saying, but what if it does come closer? Well, if it does come closer and say takes this far right track here, we're going to have stronger winds in South Florida. We'll have stronger squalls. We'll have tropical storm force gusts to 40 or 50 miles an hour. But here's the thing with tropical storms and hurricanes in South Florida, and this is a pretty good recommendation for just about all of Florida. We shutter for hurricanes and we don't shutter for tropical storms. That being said, if you are more comfortable shuttering for a tropical storm, by all means, if it's not going to get you injured, moving things around and stuff to put the shutters up or to close them if they're accordions, by all means, go ahead and do it. And we've got still a window of an opportunity to do it here. I would never tell anybody to, you have no choice, you have to put them up, or no, don't put them up, right? This is kind of a personal decision on your level of comfort. You know what your house can tolerate. And let's talk kind of about that preparation part too while we're waiting on the new advisory here. We prepare our home and our boats and things like that, the outside things, for the storm itself. That's what we're preparing our outside of the house for, everything like that. That's for when the storm is hitting. we prepare ourselves for after the storm. It's when we don't have power for days, maybe weeks. It's when we don't have water pressure for days, maybe weeks. It's when trees have fallen down and we can't get out of our house for days, hopefully not weeks. It's when the services are overwhelmed and they can't get to you should you need them. That's what we prepare for internally. That's our hurricane plan. So our hurricane plan is kind of twofold here. It's the outdoor preps for our home so that it survives, and it's the indoor preps for ourselves so that we can get through the aftermath of a big hurricane event. Now, I think a lot of Florida is going to see, especially closer to the storm, is going to see power outages. Here in South Florida, we're probably going to see some power outages. I don't think they're going to be widespread, but it's still something that's really not that hard to prepare for. You know, get a flashlight and put it in a place where you can easily find it. All right, so that is that's the European there. The GFS, and this was kind of interesting here this afternoon. The GFS took a little bit of a swing to the right, but it kind of took a funny swing here because it was going and curving, and then it kind of nudged on out there. That's the mean there, because some of these members here over here kind of pulled it back to the left there. But the GFS has moved closer. Now this, if the core on Ian is tight, and we've seen some of those, like a Charlie had a very tight core, you had effects that diminished fairly quickly away from Charlie. It was still bad, but right at the core, that was the worst part. That was like a grinder. This storm, if it doesn't go through any eyewall replacement cycles, it's going to be kind of a young hurricane in terms of how many days it's been around. So it might be possible that it maintains this tight core, and if it's 150 miles west of Tampa, that's not going to be a bad thing. We're going to have winds across the west coast. We're going to have some storm surge as well, but we need to keep it about 100 miles off the coast. So here we go. Here's the new advisory. Let's get it started here. All right, so first off, what's called the forecast advisory has come in. So let's talk about the watches and warnings. So the tropical storm watch that was in effect for the lower Keys has been upgraded now to a tropical storm warning. So tropical storm warning for the lower Keys. Here comes the rest of the advisory in, and then we'll plot it here in just a second. So that's a tropical storm warning now for the lower Keys. That's not a surprise because remember we had the tropical storm watch, and that's no surprise that it was upgraded to a tropical storm warning based on the timeline there. Okay, the other watches and warnings are now a storm surge watch has been issued for the Florida Keys from Card Sound Bridge, which is right up at the uppermost point of the Keys. It's there where you leave Miami-Dade and you start heading into the Keys. So a storm surge watch for Card Sound Bridge westward to Key West, including the Dry Tortugas. So that's all of the Florida Keys now under a storm surge watch. And then also we have a storm surge watch for the west coast of Florida from Inglewood southward to Card Sound Bridge. So basically Inglewood is in Sarasota County. So basically it's from about Sarasota south all the way to Florida Bay, storm surge watch. And now a storm surge watch has been issued for the west coast of Florida from Inglewood southward to Chokoloskee. So that basically covers the southwest coast of Florida as well. So let's put it in the graphic form here, go through it, talk about it step by step. And we'll start with the advisory portion first here and then kind of break it down with what's going on. So here's the 11 o'clock advisory. Winds now up to 65 miles an hour. So it's continuing to intensify, moving to the northwest at 13. And the pressure 989 millibars, so the pressure continuing to come down, which would be expected, and it's 140 miles to the south of Grand Cayman. So we don't want it to go north of Grand Cayman. That's what little mark there in the Caribbean that says if it's turning too far to the right, it's going to get very close to Grand Cayman. We don't expect that to happen. So here's our future track here, and remember the future track contains the threat area of the tropical storm winds and hurricane conditions, but it also has the cone. Now, at this point, the cone is so small because the cone is tracking that center point. And as I always say, well, the cone graphic is a great graphic if we were tracking points, but we're not tracking a point. We're tracking a storm, and the storm has dimensions. It's big, and it could grow. And so we want to track the whole storm, and that's what the yellow represents there. That kind of is the the width of the storm in terms of the tropical storm conditions, and then you can see embedded within that there are the hurricane conditions. So that our time frame here is Monday, and we're looking at, and let me just clear up my graphic here so I can see it a little bit better. So we're looking at Monday morning there, 8 a.m. Category 1 is the forecast, and then by the time we get to Monday evening there, 8 p.m., Category 2 is the forecast, approaching, excuse me, western Cuba there. All right, going forward, there we are at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. The center has now crossed the western part of Cuba. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Pinar del Rio province there in the western part, it's very flat. They grow good tobacco there, and the storm will likely not be disrupted at all. It's going to be a quick transit across there, so land impacts may be minimal at best. But the forecast is for Category 3 intensity by Tuesday morning. And then we go on into Tuesday evening, so that's 8 p.m. Tuesday evening. So this would be the closest approach to South Florida and the Keys as well. This is when the winds are going to be strongest for Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beaches. This is when it's going to be noisy outside. Rain bands will be coming through, and it's not going to be pleasant at all. In the lower Keys, we have the tropical storm warning now, and you can see it shows up there, even though Key West isn't anywhere near the cone. And this, I'll try not to get too upset here because if you're following the cone and you're like, well, Key West isn't in the cone. There's the cone over there, but Key West is in the tropical storm conditions. So that's why I prefer my graphic. All right, so there we are. That's Tuesday night. Key West is in the tropical storm conditions, thus the tropical storm warning. And we've also got to assume, and of course they've got very good storm surge models at the Hurricane Center, that water is being pushed up through the straits and also eventually into Florida Bay, which we've seen storm surge flooding in the Keys, both Florida Straits or oceanside flooding and bayside flooding from Florida Bay there. And then of course the storm surge watch also goes up the west coast there all the way up through Fort Myers. So that's the Tuesday evening time frame there, and let's go on into the Wednesday morning time frame there. Now you can see the Hurricane Center has turned that track to the east there. Doesn't matter if you're in the cone here in Fort Myers, you're right on the edge of it. No, it doesn't matter because you are in the tropical storm conditions there. There's the forecast for 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning. After that, there it is for 8 p.m. Wednesday evening. So the closest approach to the Tampa Bay area now is going to be Wednesday evening, and we're going to talk about when you need to have your preps completed by, which is not going to be Wednesday evening. Also, you can see the hurricane winds there come off the water and into the coast there. So I wouldn't be surprised here if soon, maybe tomorrow morning, we see hurricane watches issued for parts of the Florida West Coast. And as I said earlier on, for those of you who are thinking about the shutter situation, we shutter for hurricanes because it's at the hurricane wind threshold and even a strong upper end tropical storm. And there's sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two, but when you get into the strong tropical storm and the hurricane wind mode, that's when you get stuff blowing in the air. That's when you get your windows broken, and that's when you let the wind in the house, and that's not what you want to do. By the way, just a reminder, tape does not work. I know some people have said, well, but it keeps the pieces from being, look, you don't want your window to break at all. That's the point. You want to keep the wind out. So if you're in the hurricane threat area here, you're going to want to put up shutters. That's my recommendation. So that's Wednesday evening there, and you can see the hurricane conditions, basically, at least according to this advisory, running from Fort Myers along the coast all the way up through Tampa Bay, and then almost into Cedar Key there. And then there's the forecast that goes on out. Let me back it up here so we can get that last point on there. So there's our end point there, which is Friday evening. So the hurricane conditions, the intensity forecast comes down after Wednesday. They can't put dots along the way, 3, 2, 2, 1 tropical storm. They have these mandatory forecast points. They're specific. And so at a point between Wednesday evening and Thursday evening, the winds are starting to come down because of the dry air and the wind shear. The latest advisories, watches, oh, they're up, okay. So there is the tropical storm watch now for the west coast of Florida, and this basically is from Inglewood, so it's just north of the Fort Myers area, includes Fort Myers, down through Marco Island as well as Naples under a tropical storm watch. And we have the tropical storm warning now for Key West, so it's right there. Let me draw on the screen as opposed to just point with my cursor. tropical storm warnings for Havana and the central provinces of Cuba. There, tropical storm warning for Key West and the lower Keys. Tropical storm watch from basically about Chokoloskee, which is south of Marco Island, through Marco Island, Naples, and Fort Myers, and the hurricane warning here for the western part of Cuba. All right, so let's do a little quick timing thing here on what we're expecting with that. And you know what? I'm going to call this our deeper dive for this evening, okay? All right, so the thinking, we kind of work on a timeline here. It doesn't matter how far the storm is away from us. It matters when the tropical storm winds arrive. That's our clock. That's what we're counting down to. We want to have everything wrapped up before the tropical storm winds arrive. Because by the time tropical storm winds arrive, it's too hard to do just about anything outside. It is blowing too hard. So we want to wrap everything up before the tropical storm winds arrive. So this is our timing graphic here, and this has the area where the tropical storm winds extend out, the extent of the tropical storm conditions. And so we're here into western Cuba by Monday evening there. So then going forward here, we are the winds approaching the Keys there by Tuesday morning. So everybody in the Keys, especially the lower Keys, have everything wrapped up by sunset Monday. That's tomorrow evening, less than 24 hours now. Need to have everything wrapped up there. And then going forward into Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday evening, here is 6 p.m. Tuesday evening. Tropical storm winds reaching the southwest coast there of Florida now. Everything needs to be wrapped up early in the day on the southwest coast. So on Tuesday morning when the sun comes up, if you still have stuff to do, get it done. Naples, Marco Island, all the way up into Fort Myers. You're not going to have a lot of time on Tuesday, and the weather could already be pretty bad as we get into Tuesday on the southwest coast. See, folks in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beaches here, the tropical storm conditions aren't extending over to our side of the coast here. It's still going to be windy, but this for us would not be a shutter situation. It might be a case where we are still seeing strong winds, of course, and things like that, and some sporadic power outages. But for Miami-Dade, Broward, and the Palm Beaches, and even Martin and St. Lucie counties, this is not typically what we would consider a shutter situation. If you feel more comfortable putting them up and you can do them safely, by all means go ahead and get that done by Monday evening, I would say, for South Florida as well, if not Tuesday morning. All right, let's move forward into the timeline here. So now we're approaching the Tampa Bay area, and this is Tuesday night at midnight. So folks in Tampa Bay need to have things wrapped up no later than sunset Tuesday, but more likely by midday Tuesday. We'll say at the very latest sunset on Tuesday, because the conditions are deteriorating there. And you can kind of almost make out here how with the winds going around the storm, how it would be pushing storm surge along and up the coast there. All right, so that is the Tuesday night. Now we're into Wednesday morning here. There's sunrise Wednesday morning. Tropical storm conditions continue to spread up the west coast now. They're up through Hernando County, approaching Citrus County there, and then here we are. So let's stop right there, because even though this is the leading edge that we're talking about here, this is not where the worst of the weather is, right? So this is just a graphic that shows where we need to be done by, when we need to be ready by. So just make sure this estimated time of arrival, that's not for the center, that's not for the worst, that's for our cutoff point with the tropical storm winds coming in. So that's Wednesday morning, there's Wednesday afternoon, and then there's Wednesday evening. So we're up there in the panhandle now by Wednesday evening. And you can see, according to this graphic here, the tropical storm conditions, they extend pretty far inland. Maybe I can zoom in here. No, I can't. So they extend pretty far inland there. So Orlando, let me back up a little bit here and we can see if we can estimate into Orlando. So it's right across the I-4 corridor there during the day on Wednesday, and it looks like into Orlando by Wednesday afternoon. So folks in Orlando, you need to get it wrapped up too by Tuesday evening, maybe even Tuesday evening in Orlando, Tuesday midday for Tampa. All right, so let's break it down and talk specifically about what our preps are here. And I've kind of spelled it out, kind of basing this on the advisory cycle here. This was based on the earlier advisory. There hasn't been much change, not enough to warrant changing this, except for maybe a little bit of a timing issue with the Tampa Bay area. We'll talk more about that in a second. So for South Florida, Southeast Florida, this is Palm Beaches, Miami-Dade, Broward. The closest approach is Tuesday night. So that means the weather is going to deteriorate during the day on Tuesday. So tomorrow we're still, if we haven't yet, taking care of our yard items that could blow around, and along the coast there, and our boats, we want to also take care of boats and get them set up for the strong winds that'll be coming from the south. Now, with the storm surge watch in effect for the Keys, there's another consideration with boats, and that is tidal swings. The boats will come up and come down. So the recommendation there, if you haven't done it before, is you want to run your boat, and let me just check something here. No, okay, we're good. You want to run your dock lines long as possible. You want to run them as much length as possible to cushion that up and down motion from storm surge. So the Keys, even though we might not have tropical storm conditions in the middle and upper Keys, we could have storm surge flooding. And that goes even more so for the lower Keys as well as the West Coast. So that's it. Closest approach is going to be Tuesday, especially Tuesday night for the Keys there. So let's move on up now. And this is the southwest coast. This is where we have the storm surge watch now, and also for the lower Keys, Key West, basically from about Big Pine down to Key West. So we're going to finish our preps by sunset tomorrow. So we've got less than 24 hours. Closest approach is going to be tomorrow, Tuesday night. So during the day Tuesday, the weather's not suitable to do outdoor activities. So on Monday, we're checking our hurricane kit and plan, taking care of our yard items, preparing our home and our boat. If you feel like putting up shutters in the Keys, and you can do it easily, go ahead. And if you feel like, and sometimes this is a visitor's question, or people in mobile homes and things like that, evacuation, especially in the lower Keys, then Monday, tomorrow would be the day to do it, because Monday night we're going to tend to not want to move anymore. I call that shelter in place. We're going to stay where we're going to be to ride out the storm. All right, let's move on up the coast here. And so because this is going to be coming from south to north, these are going to be a little more general terms here, but this is basically finish the preps by sunset Tuesday in the Tampa Bay area, but to the south, Fort Myers and Port Charlotte, I think you want to get them done much earlier than that. I would get them done as early as I can on Tuesday morning if you are still doing preps. So by midday in the Tampa Bay area, and then probably by sunset farther to the north, and also in Orlando. So tomorrow, and the closest approach is going to be later Wednesday and Wednesday night. So tomorrow we're checking on our hurricane kit and plan. We're taking care of our yard items. We're preparing home and our boats tomorrow. Shutters, I think tomorrow is a perfect day if you're in this western area here, which I showed you, which is the hurricane threat area. Shutters, if you can put them up, that would be that. If I was in Tampa, I would be putting my shutters up. Let me put it that way. Evacuation considerations, that's going to be a big deal, especially for the low-lying areas, especially Pinellas County, like Anna Maria Island, Bayshore, which always seems to flood even when the wind's blowing hard out of the south. That's going to be a big consideration here, storm surge flooding, and we might see the storm surge watch extended northward tomorrow. So it's all based on time. Remember, the watch means the conditions are possible within 48 hours. The warning means within 36 hours, and those are our windows there. So Tuesday, because the weather's going to be going downhill on Tuesday, that's your indoor preps, especially by later in the day. When I say indoor preps, because this storm is going to be hitting during the night, placing flashlights and stuff like that. I might have the time off on that. Maybe Wednesday is your indoor preps, because you can move your flashlight around and place it for when the power goes out. Wednesday, of course, you're going to be ready to shelter in place. Tuesday night, once the sun goes down, you're staying home, and you're not going back out because Wednesday the weather is going to be deteriorating. All right, finally, let's wrap it up here in the Panhandle. We're going to finish our preps by sunset on Wednesday, so we still have a couple of days here. Closest approach looks like Thursday right now. Monday, tomorrow, we're checking our kit and our plans, taking care of the yard items. Tuesday, prepare the home and boats. Wednesday could be shutters and evacuation. We want things wrapped up by sunset on Wednesday, because Thursday we're going to be ready to shelter in place. So that's kind of everything. Wow, that's a lot to cover there, huh? And because we're covering a big area here, but I know this can be really scary. It's always a big lift. You know, it's never an easy task preparing for a hurricane. And the thing is, and my only advice is that everybody who has suffered like damage to their home or structural loss in a hurricane, or stayed in a flood zone when evacuations have been issued, a storm surge flood zone, says, I will never do that again. And so that's kind of my stiff, my hard truth there is that as we go down the road here, and I'm specifically talking about the west coast of Florida here, especially for tomorrow, and this gets closer, I don't think you want to be behind the curve on preparations. If you're in an evacuation area, know ahead of time that you might have to evacuate and be ready to do that. So let me quickly just take a few questions here because, and before I do that, let me, of course, if you like the video, please click the like button, please subscribe, and please get the notification. And by the way, if you share it with your friends, I usually try to break it down into chapters when you look at the playback on the video, so you can kind of tell what's where to find the information you're looking for. All right, what are people saying here tonight? So we talked about Naples, impacts to Miami like Irma. No, not at all. We'll be well below an Irma threshold in Miami and Broward. Please explain again about the Euro model. So the Euro model was kind of sensing this trough, this dip in the jet stream a little bit more than the other models, and so it was tending to turn more to the east. And let me just say a little bit about modeling a dip in the jet stream. I'm sorry, I do not have a dip in the jet stream graphic handy. Maybe I do. Okay, I kind of have a dip in the jet stream graphic handy. Excuse me. This happens when you talk long times. So there's our dip in the jet stream. So modeling something like this is you have to do two things. You have to get the dip right in the models, and you also have to get how does the storm respond to the dip. So it's kind of a double whammy there. So that's our Euro, which seemed to be more that the system was going to be affected by the dip. All right, so lots of flooding in Miami. I don't know about lots of flooding, possibly some flooding. Sarasota, you need to be preparing tomorrow. It's just too close of a call. And I think that is about it. Land O'Lakes, so that's northern Hillsborough County, southern Pasco County. Yeah, you're inland, but I'd prepare for at least power outages there. No watches hosted for the southeast coast. That is correct. No watches. I don't expect we'll have any watches. So I'm going to wrap it up there before I can't talk anymore, and I will see you tomorrow. I'll probably do a 5 a.m. Tropical tracks. So we'll see you then.